His hand had already slipped beneath my shirt when I whispered that we shouldn't. But my body didn't care. My back was pressed up against the cold laundry machines, his body between my legs, the scent of his soap thick on the collar of that sweatshirt I'd folded 100 times before without thinking twice. The dryer behind me thumped a steady beat, masking the sound of our quick, shallow breaths. His breath was warm as it brushed the side of my neck. He shifted, gently pushing further inside me. I flinched, not because of pain, but because I knew deep down I wasn't ready for any of this. Not for what it meant, not for how it would change everything. Yet I didn't stop him. I wanted more. I needed to feel something that didn't feel hollow. He paused, murmuring against my skin that he'd stop if I said the word. But I didn't. I stayed silent, clinging tighter to him. I never thought this was how I'd cross the line. Not like this, not in a laundry room that still smelled like lemon detergent and dryer sheets, not on a regular Tuesday night, and definitely not with him. I'm 39. I've been married for 15 years. My husband trusted me completely. So much so that he didn't blink when we let a younger man, 10 years younger, stay in our basement after a flood last spring. He was supposed to be helping repaint after the damage. I say, boy, but he doesn't feel like that anymore. Not when he looks at me the way he does. Not when he touches me like I'm something rare. His name is Adam. He's my cousin's son, practically raised in our family like one of our own. After losing his job, he needed a place to start fresh. My husband offered him the basement. I offered kindness, food, and small errands. Somewhere between casseroles and folded towels, things shifted. Maybe he started looking at me differently. Or maybe I started seeing him. I don't even know when it changed. Maybe it was the night I walked past the bathroom and caught a glimpse of him stepping out of the shower, a towel low around his waist. Or maybe it was New Year's, when he stayed late after everyone else had gone, and we ended up sitting on the kitchen floor, laughing and a little tipsy, too close for what was innocent. That night, he asked me if I was happy. I lied. He didn't press it, just looked at me for a long time. He didn't look away, even when I did. It was a quiet truth hanging between us. What do you do when the one person you're supposed to protect ends up being the one you long for in secret? I hate the word, affair. It sounds too neat, too organized, like it had a beginning and an agreement. This wasn't that. It was messier, lonelier, and far more real than I ever expected. None of this was ever planned. At first, it felt like an accident. Then, like something that was bound to happen. Now, it's a truth I carry quietly, like it's soaked into my skin. Because when I close my eyes, I don't see my husband's face. I see Adam's hands gripping the edge of the washer as he leaned closer, his mouth burning against my collarbone, his voice thick with need. He whispered that I felt so full. And I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want him to stop. Some secrets don't come crashing out, they linger, whispering through you, again and again. If you're carrying something like that, you're not alone. I think someone else out there needs to hear this too. The next morning, I couldn't even look at myself. I stood in the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, staring into the mirror at a version of me I didn't recognize. My hair was pulled back. My skin looked pale under the harsh light. My lips were still faintly swollen from the night before. My thighs ached where he had held me tight, as if my body had made sure I wouldn't forget. I didn't need reminders, my body remembered every second. Downstairs, life moved on like nothing happened. My husband was humming over his coffee, scrolling through the news on his phone. The dog scratched at the back door. It was all so normal, exactly the same, and yet nothing was. I had heard Adam leave earlier for his morning jog. The screen door had creaked open 20 minutes before I came down. I had waited, made sure the coast was clear. I couldn't face him yet. I didn't know how to look at someone after giving them that part of you. We had kissed once before, late at night in the hallway when the whole house was asleep. I told myself it didn't count. Blamed it on wine, on stress, on a bad day. I told him it couldn't happen again, and for a while, we kept that promise. He stayed distant, polite. I tried to play the role, smiling too hard at the dinner table, asking about his job search, cracking dumb jokes about the basement paint never drying. But I still caught him watching me when he thought I wouldn't notice. Last night wasn't just lust. It was gravity. I pulled him in, and deep down, I know I let it happen. Because I was hungry for something I hadn't felt in years. He saw that emptiness in me. And instead of looking away, he leaned in. The truth is, I haven't felt wanted in a very long time. My husband, Mark, is a good man. Steady, thoughtful in the practical ways. He's the type who flips the mattress twice a year without needing a reminder and keeps an extra set of car keys in the junk drawer, just in case. He's kind, predictable, but somewhere along the way, we stopped touching each other like it meant anything. Our kisses turned into quick taps. Our hugs barely lasted. I don't blame him, and I don't even know when I started feeling nothing at all. Maybe this is what happens in long marriages, the quiet fading of passion, the slow drift of attention. Or maybe that's just something people say to avoid admitting how lonely it feels. Adam wasn't meant to stay long. A few weeks, maybe a month. But the job search dragged on. Mark liked having someone around to help with things he never had time for. And I found comfort in the sound of footsteps above me when Mark wasn't home. I liked the way Adam offered to take out the trash without being asked. I liked hearing my name in his voice, gentle, not rushed, not tired. He didn't flirt, he wasn't bold, but he lingered, in conversations, in doorways, in my thoughts. About a week before everything happened, I found him in the garage. He had taken apart an old shelf Mark had been meaning to fix for months. He was kneeling on the concrete floor, hands dusty, shirt damp with sweat, quietly humming a song from the 90s. I stood in the doorway and told him he didn't have to do all that. He looked up at me, squinting against the light, and said he knew. But it made him feel useful again. Then he smiled, and not in the way young men often do, with bravado or charm. It was a softer smile. One that reached deep, the kind that settles in your gut and doesn't leave. It was the kind of smile that makes you forget who you're supposed to be. I should have walked away. I wanted to. Instead, I went inside, poured him a glass of lemonade, and came back to sit on the cooler beside him while he kept working. We sat and talked about everything and nothing. At one point, he asked me what I wanted to be before I got married. I opened my mouth, but no answer came. No one had asked me that in 2 decades. That night, I cried in the shower. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had started to want something I couldn't explain, something that didn't fit inside my life. And that scared me. There's a crack in my routine now, and I feel it all the time. I glance at the clock more than I should. I know when Adam is upstairs, when he's outside, when he's walking past me in the hallway. I know the scent of his shampoo. I know the way he laughs. And I know without a doubt, if it hadn't happened last night, it would have happened soon. The point of no return had already passed. We just hadn't crossed it until then. Now, I can't stop thinking about his touch. The way his hands felt on my skin. The way my wedding ring suddenly felt like fire when he ran his fingers along the inside of my thigh. The way he looked at me, not like a woman juggling bills and groceries in a full calendar, but like someone he wanted to unwrap slowly. Completely. I wish I didn't want him. But I do. And the hardest part is knowing he wants me too. It didn't take long for the air to shift between us. We didn't talk about what happened. No long conversations, no confessions. But something had changed. Everything between us felt warmer, slower, charged with something unspoken. Even silence started to feel risky. Mark was leaving the house earlier than usual, calls, meetings, errands. And Adam would return from his morning run just as I stepped into the kitchen, still in my robe, acting surprised even though we both knew better. Pretending didn't work anymore. One morning, I was reaching into the fridge just as he came up behind me to grab a glass from the cupboard. I jumped slightly, not from fear, but from how close he was. His bare chest was warm and damp from the run, and I could feel the heat of him against my back. "Sorry," he said softly, his breath brushing my skin. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," I answered too quickly. He stayed close just a moment longer than necessary before stepping back like nothing had happened. I stood there with my hand still on a carton of eggs, trying not to tremble. It was in the small things now, the way his shoulder brushed mine when we passed each other on the stairs, the way he lingered after dinner in the hallway, maybe waiting for a sign, maybe just unwilling to leave. One night, I stayed up late folding laundry while Mark was already asleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the dryer in the next room. Adam walked in barefoot, his eyes still soft with sleep, his chest bare. "You should be asleep," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He sat on the edge of the couch opposite me, watching my hands fold clothes. "You fold everything so carefully," he said. I gave a small shrug. "Old habit, muscle memory." His voice was low, and I could hear the dryer spinning in the background as I focused on one of Mark's undershirts. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but I wasn't. Because I could see in his eyes that he wasn't just asking out of concern, he knew. He knew I wasn't sleeping. He knew the moment in the garage hadn't been a mistake. And more than that, he wasn't pretending it didn't mean something. And the truth, I didn't want him to pretend. Another evening, I found him outside by the fence. It was a little past 10. Mark was out with some old friends, and I couldn't sleep, so I made a cup of tea and stepped out into the cool night, sweater wrapped around me and feet bare on the porch. Adam turned when he heard the door creak. Didn't think anyone else was awake, he said. I couldn't sleep, I replied, wrapping my arms tighter across my chest. You okay? He asked. I paused before answering. No, he nodded, like he already expected that. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me an earbud. Listen, he said gently. I slipped it in, and he hit play. Soft piano mixed with the sound of distant thunder filled my ears. It helps when my head won't quiet down, he murmured. We stood like that for a while, sharing one song in the stillness. I looked up at him, really looked, and I felt it again. That slow, aching gravity between us. When the music faded, he pulled the earbud from my ear with care. I'll go in, he said. But I didn't move. I whispered, stay. He sat beside me on the porch swing, knees brushing mine. I kept my eyes forward, too afraid that looking at him would tip something over I couldn't take back. You don't have to say anything, he whispered. I just like being near you, he said. I don't know what I'm doing, I admitted quietly. You don't have to know, he replied, his voice soft. He didn't reach for me. He didn't touch me, and somehow, that made everything worse. Because I knew, if I turned to him, if I let my fingers drift just a few inches toward his, he'd take me back to that breathless heat of the garage, to the place where everything shifted. And I'd go. God help me, I would go. Later that week, Mark left town for 2 nights, another sales conference, the kind he always returned from bleary-eyed with a handful of branded pens and no real stories to tell. I told myself I'd avoid being alone with Adam. I made plans, filled my schedule with errands and excuses, tried to stay away from temptation. But it didn't matter. Friday evening, I walked into the house and found Adam crouched by the back door, fixing the old screen that had always creaked. He looked up, hands covered in grime, hair tied back in a loose bun. You're home early, he said. I didn't answer, just dropped the grocery bags on the kitchen floor. When he stood and wiped his hands on a rag, the silence that followed was thick, almost physical. It pressed in on us, heavy and certain. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just said, you shouldn't be alone tonight. And I nodded, because I didn't want to be. But I wasn't sure what I wanted more, to be comforted, or to be destroyed. It happened again that night, in the guest room, the one Mark had outfitted with blackout curtains, saying they were better for guests who needed real rest. But they didn't just block out the light, they trapped the heat too. The air was heavy and unmoving. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening for the creak of the floorboards. I could hear Adam in the hallway. His steps were soft, hesitant, like he was still deciding whether to stop walking. But he didn't stop. The doorknob turned slowly. There was no knock, no words. When he stepped inside, he didn't close the door all the way. Left it ajar, like that might make it easier to pretend nothing was happening, like it gave us some path back. I didn't ask what he was doing. And he didn't ask if he should be there. He came toward me, breath catching, like he'd been trying not to come in at all. And I looked up at him. The soft yellow light from the hallway cut through the shadows, casting gentle curves over the sharp lines of his jaw. And all I could say, the only words that made it out, was, you're not supposed to be here. He nodded, eyes lowered. I know, I could have stopped it then. I could have stood up, walked out, turned this into a near miss, something messy but forgettable. But I didn't, because something inside me had been cracking for years. And in that room, in that quiet, he felt like the only one who saw it. When I reached up and wrapped my hand around his wrist, he flinched, just slightly. But he let me pull him closer. I'm not ready for this, I whispered. His reply came low, rough, like he was admitting something out loud for the first time. Me neither. He came down slowly, carefully, like he was afraid his presence might shatter me. His skin was hot through the thin cotton of my shirt, his breath landing in soft, rhythmic waves along my neck. I wasn't shaking because I was scared. I was shaking because I didn't know how to be touched anymore. Not like this. His hands weren't greedy, they were gentle, reverent, almost hesitant, like he didn't believe he was allowed to be here. Maybe he wasn't, but I let him be. I let him slide my shirt upward, his fingers brushing the skin of my stomach in slow, unsure movements. My own hand moved instinctively, finding the strong line of his back, the curve of muscle beneath his skin. His voice broke the silence. "Are you okay?" I could barely say yes. Because I wasn't. Not really. But I didn't want to be okay. I wanted to forget what okay even felt like. There was one fragile, aching second before everything changed, when he paused above me, close enough to feel his heart racing. He said, "I can stop." But he didn't move, and I didn't ask him to. I bit my lip hard to hold in the sound as he pressed into me, slow, deep, undeniably real. My hand found the back of his neck. I pulled him down against me, not to see his face, but to lose myself in something raw and wordless. I didn't want to know what this meant to him. I didn't want to think about what I was giving up. All I wanted was to feel something that wasn't numb. I held on to him like I was drowning. And in some ways, I was. The room was quiet, save for the rhythm of our breath and the soft creak of the bed frame beneath us. He moved like he was afraid I'd break. And maybe I would have, if he hadn't touched me like I was something both precious and already gone. At one point, he whispered, "Tell me if it's too much." I didn't answer him, because it was too much. And still, I wanted more. Afterward, I sat against the headboard, knees pulled to my chest, shirt halfway on, heart nowhere to be found. He lay beside me, staring blankly at the ceiling. He didn't speak. He didn't touch me. "We can pretend this didn't happen," he said, voice low and steady. "If you want." I turned to him slowly. "I don't know what I want." He nodded. A beat passed. Then softer, like it hurt to say it. "I just wanted to be where you were." He left quietly. Didn't close the door. Didn't look back. And I stayed there, wrapped in sweat and memory, trying to catch my breath, knowing full well I could never explain this to anyone. Not even myself. I thought I was prepared for guilt. But nothing prepared me for the ache of having what I wasn't supposed to want, and wanting it again. The next morning, I avoided mirrors. I brushed my teeth without looking up, tied my hair back the way I always did. Got dressed like it was any other day, like hours earlier my skin hadn't been mapped by someone else's hands. I burned the eggs, forgot to put coffee in the machine, nearly left the front door unlocked when I stepped out for the mail. My body moved through the rituals of normalcy, but my mind was still back in that guest room, still tangled in sheets that weren't mine, still haunted by the weight of him. The breath on my neck. The sound he made when I pressed my hand to his chest and pulled him deeper. I didn't feel clean, but I didn't feel sorry either. And that terrified me. The guilt didn't come all at once. It leaked in through the smallest cracks. Like when Mark kissed my forehead in the kitchen, casual and sweet, without a hint of suspicion. Like when I saw Adam's sweatshirt still folded neatly over the back of the chair he'd sat in. Like when I caught my own reflection in the oven door and saw a woman I didn't recognize. Or maybe a version of myself I had buried long ago. Then I started hearing his voice. Not the words, just the weight of them. The quiet, serious way he only spoke when no one else was listening. He didn't text. He didn't call. But 3 days later, I saw his truck parked a few houses down, not in front of ours, just close enough to matter. Close enough to feel like he didn't want to be seen, but couldn't stay away. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the rain trace slow lines down the window, wondering if he was out there thinking about that night, wondering if he regretted it. Because I hadn't decided if I did. The absence carved itself into my days like a hollow I couldn't fill. I told myself it was better this way, cleaner, safer, survivable. But it didn't feel like healing. It felt like suffocating in slow motion. Mark came home from his conference with 2 new ties and a tired smile. He wrapped his arms around me like nothing had changed, like I was still the woman he left behind. And maybe that was the cruelest part, I looked the same. I still made coffee the way he liked. Still folded his laundry with his socks tucked in pairs. Still kissed him goodnight with lips that had once whispered someone else's name. But inside me, something had unraveled, and no amount of silence or distance was knitting it back together. I kept replaying that moment at the doorframe. His handwriting, sharp, slanted, rushed like it hurt to write. I know it can't happen again, but I don't regret it. Not 1 second. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a promise. It was just truth. And somehow, that hurt more than any lie. One night I stood outside the guest room, hand on the doorknob. I didn't go in. I just pressed my palm to the wood and tried to remember what it had felt like. That brief flicker of being seen, of being wanted without conditions, of giving in without apology. I told myself it had to end. That it did end. But every time I turned down that hallway, every time the floor creaked under my steps, I wondered if Adam felt the same ache in the space I left behind. It was like he vanished. Or more truthfully, like he knew staying away was the only way to preserve what little dignity we had left. But that didn't stop the unraveling, at least, not mine. My husband began to notice, not in obvious ways, not in the dramatic sense people expect. It was the little things. The tiny cracks that appeared when I wasn't trying hard enough to pretend. Like when I overseasoned the stew and didn't taste it. Or when I stared too long out the window during dinner, as if waiting for someone, or something, that never came. One night, he said it gently, just enough for it to sting. "You've been somewhere else lately." I smiled too fast. "Just tired." He nodded and didn't press, but I felt the distance between us expand with every word I chose not to say. The real break came in the garage. I was reorganizing the shelves, forcing myself into motion so I wouldn't have to sit still and think. Outside, another storm had rolled in. Rain spat sideways through the cracked window, wind howling against the door, and then came the sound of boots creaking on the floor behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew it was him before he spoke. "I wasn't gonna come back," Adam said, voice low, rough. "But you left your scarf in the truck. Figured you'd want it." I stood still, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo off the walls. "I didn't forget it," I said. "I know." When I finally turned, he looked soaked, tense, his jaw locked like he was biting back everything he didn't have the right to say. "I've never hated wanting someone before," I whispered. His mouth opened, then closed again. "I didn't mean to wreck anything," he said. "But I can't unfeel it." My hand trembled as I reached for the scarf. I didn't touch him. I couldn't, because if I did, I wouldn't stop. "I should go," he said. But he didn't move, and neither did I. The next morning, I found my daughter standing in the hallway, her eyes narrowed. She didn't speak, just looked at me, and somehow, I knew that she knew. Not the details, not the truth, but the shift. She sensed something had changed. Something had cracked open inside me. And now it was leaking into the walls of this house, seeping into the spaces between conversations, the quiet moments after someone said goodnight. I wanted to tell her I was still me. But even I didn't believe that anymore. I sat by the window that night, staring out at the driveway. It was empty. The streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, and the neighbor's dog barked twice before falling silent. Adam's scarf was wrapped around my shoulders. It still smelled like him, heat, cedar, and guilt. I traced the edge of the fabric with my fingers, then pressed it to my lips. "I've lived with guilt before," I whispered into the dark. "But not like this. Not the kind that tasted like comfort. Not the kind that made me feel more alive than I had in years." And deep down, in the part of me I tried so hard to ignore, I already knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not really. Not even close. Not all betrayals are loud. Some happen in silence, behind closed doors, in moments filled with longing and confusion. This story wasn't meant to glorify infidelity, but to explore the emotional fractures that often go unseen, and the choices people make when they feel unseen themselves. Healing doesn't always begin with forgiveness. Sometimes, it begins with truth, raw, complicated, and imperfect. Thank you for watching, listening, or reading. Your time, presence, and open heart mean more than words can say. Every like, share, and comment supports the continued telling of real, human stories, stories that challenge us to feel, reflect, and understand the world and the people around us a little more deeply. Disclaimer: this story is a work of emotional fiction intended for mature audiences. While inspired by real-life relationship dynamics, it is not based on any specific individual or true event. The content explores sensitive themes such as infidelity, emotional neglect, and personal conflict. Viewer discretion is advised. We do not condone or encourage betrayal, but rather present these narratives to provoke thought, conversation, and empathy.